All right. Well, welcome everyone who will be looking on to the video later on today, and those who are live with us. This is the second Rainbow Coalition Sunday Fun Day crew. We are about having fun, reading about things that matter, presenting important issues of not what only reflect our past, but also speak about our present conditions and situation, and help us along our journey as revolutionary. So today we're on chapter 10, in which we will be covering a particular subject dealing with 9/11, and our brother Kwame, who name is Dion, as far as his outside trail. And we left off in discussing on chapter 9 about our brother, I would say, experience being in prison, and how the system really didn't have human rights, you could say, but it wasn't actually used. As a matter of fact, it dehumanizes our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated. So we're going to continue on with that conversation after we read the chapter. It's a little lengthy here, but it's not as long as chapter 9. And we're going to have a game that's going to consist of a list of words in which we're going to guess the words. Since we have an uneven number of people that's in our group, which is pretty small due to other obligations by our normal participant, the Brown Berets, and our moderator, who's a Brown Beret, we're going to continue to go forward. We do pray that everyone return home safely. And I'm glad, based on the pictures and the video, they had a spectacular day. And I thank our sister, Conrad Elder, Miss Leslie is here with us today, and our brother, Nico, who is our tech guy, and he's more than welcome to join in our discussion, as well as our game will be helpful. And we're about to just turn this reading out and make it really fun. So we're going to begin by reading the Statement of Unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. And we're going to start with the legacy. Anybody care to read that?
I actually don't have it up.
I can start it out. The preface, right?
We're going to start with the statement where it say the legacy of the first Rainbow Coalition. It should be in the back of the book if you have the book. If you don't, we're just going to go forward. Brother Nico, do you have the book, or are you able to pull?
I
have the PDF?
I just have the PDF, but it doesn't have the.
It's all the way in the back. If you can scroll all the way to the appendix, the second appendix is on page 268.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. Now, the only thing that's different is that there's some more groups have been added to the members of the coalition. So if we don't mention it, please don't charge it to our heart, charge it to our head, and we will correct it later. Would anybody care to read it, or?
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the preface because I love it so much.
Okay.
All right. The U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of the indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to reservations, concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the eagle sunk its claws into other nations, making war on Mexico and grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, exploiting both the people within its boundaries and those in every other country, bullying them with military interventions and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As Huey P. Newton stated, quote, "We have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary. Racism is a byproduct of capitalism," unquote. The working people of the world of every ethnicity or nationality face a common enemy that is destroying life on earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met to live a good and meaningful life: food, shelter, healthcare, education, freedom from oppression by the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably.
Great. I'll take the second half. A statement of unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The legacy of the First Rainbow Coalition dates back to its foundings on April 4th, 1969, by the original Black Panther Party. Original Young Lords and Young Patriot organizations. A number of other organizations joined the coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Raising Up Anger, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight back against the capitalist imperialist system in various ways around particular demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the First Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model of class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated that at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle. He said that it's a class struggle, God damn it. My unity with the various oppressed ethnicity and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic community that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition, therefore the necessity to form a united front against a common class oppressor. The communist imperialist—
Oh, no, not communist, the capitalist.
Oh, the capital. God. Thank you for correcting me on that. Okay, the class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor. The capitalist, imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule and subsequently used the entire repressive force of the state, police, courts, jail, prisons, and intelligence agency, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. Okay. Do you want to read, Brother Nico, or you want me to continue on?
Yeah, I can read.
Okay.
We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14th, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the united front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriot organization, and all other original Rainbow Coalition members, we establish our programmatic unity. The 6 disciplinary rules that we uphold ties all of the organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist imperialist ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party and Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Hashtag all power to the people. Hashtag boots on the ground.
All right. All right. All members of the coalition consists of the New African Black Panther Party, the American Indian Movement, Indiana, Kentucky White Panther Party, the Green Party of New Jersey, the Poor People Army, the Las Mesa Nation Dead Brown Beret, the Ferry, which is the feminine Fury, which
Fury,
is
I think it's Fury, you know, like
Fury,
your anger, Fury, I think.
right?
Yeah.
Fury, which is the feminist uprising to resist inequality and exploitation, the Guardian Rebellion, and who else? These other groups.
Well, there's that NASO, North Alabama School for Organizers, and the New Era Young Lords.
Okay.
That's what I have on. Kwame sent me a copy of this. So
Okay, good. Yes, please do that, because I can't go to my PDF and grab that. So I'm reading straight from the book.
Right.
Okay, now the 6 disciplinary rules. Number one, members will conduct themselves in a manner to bring credit to the coalition and will treat others with respect and politeness. 2, members will be sober when on Rainbow Coalition business and will not engage in any criminal activity while a member. 3, no member will engage in violence except in the extremity of self-defense. 4, members will not gossip nor be divisive to the unity of the Second Rainbow Coalition. 5, members will not act as informant nor work against the purpose of the Second Rainbow Coalition. And 6, nobody is authorized to speak for the Second Rainbow Coalition unless authorized to do so. I wish that was in big print. I'm reading small print, but it's all good. Anybody have any questions in regarding to our statement of unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition or members of coalition or any disciplinary rules? All right. So we're going to go into chapter 10, 9/11 in my outside trail. Anyone want to just take the first part of the read first?
Sure, I can.
Okay,
Let me get to the right page here.
the right page would be page 115.
Gotcha. Too far. Sorry, I am on the PDF, so it takes a little bit to get there.
Okay. If you want me to start, I'll start. It's up to you.
No, I can start. So
Okay.
10. Chapter 10, 9/11 and my outside trial. After the stabbing incident in G Cell House, I was placed back on the SHU and given another year of disciplinary segregation. Like the first time, I was placed back in the bubble cell on 1200 range in violation of IDOC policy again. After filing grievances and protesting my placement in the bubble cell, I was then moved to 1205. I tried to protest my placement in 1205 because the prisoner who had been there before me had smeared feces all over the walls. Instead of them making sure the cell was sanitary, they forced me into it anyway, leaving me to clean that cell up. I knew what to expect when I returned to SHU the second time, but I still wasn't going to lay back and accept anything they did to me and others. Some things I could fight and possibly win concessions around. Others, I knew where battles I had to fight, knowing I could never win. Nonetheless, despite it all, I knew I wasn't going to allow them to break me. The struggle had to continue. Several months went by when I was pulled out of my cell and taken to a holding cell where they read me my new charges behind the stabbing case. Sullivan County had charged me with 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of battery by means of a deadly weapon, and 1 count of being a prisoner in possession of a dangerous device or material. I was facing the rest of my life in prison if convicted on all accounts. Ironically, though, I was more concerned about how my mom would receive the news than my own fate. Part of me felt bad for putting her through this ordeal with me. Despite what we, the incarcerated, may believe, those who supported their loved ones while they're serving their time are also doing that time with them mentally, emotionally, financially, and even physically by their constant visits and the like. Sometimes we forget that, but it's true. You don't want your family and close ones to suffer from the decisions we are forced to make due to the daily dilemmas we face each and every day on the inside. But we also don't want to feel handicapped by the decisions that do affect others. I, for one, felt that if I was going to be forced to confront dehumanization and constant degradation to my humanity, then the only suitable course for me to take was one of resistance. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't fight back and stay true to my convictions. I knew I would be hurting my loved ones, such as my mother, in the process. But even if I did have to spend the rest of my life in prison, I had to live with the consequences ultimately. And I was fine with that as long as I stayed true to my convictions and could help others to embrace theirs. The morning
Okay. Go ahead.
The morning of September 11th, 2001, I'll never forget. I was on the SHU when I heard several prisoners yelling over the range that planes were crashing into the Twin Towers in New York. I hurried up and jumped on my radio and started listening in. I had never heard of the terrorist organization Al Qaeda or Osama bin Laden until this day. For most of my life, I hadn't really thought much of international affairs and U.S. foreign policy. After 9/11 happened, though, I started studying U.S. foreign policy and its legacy throughout the world, as if I was a student trying to acquire a PhD in political science or something. Around this time, a lot of documentaries were coming out about the U.S. involvement with the Mujahideen forces, who were integral to defeating the Soviet forces in Afghanistan throughout the 80s. That's when I learned that Osama bin Laden had been part of the Mujahideen and funded a lot of their war efforts as well. I thought it was odd that at one point, Osama bin Laden and the US had once been on the same page, fighting a common enemy. The more I watched documentaries and read books, I began to realize how common stuff like that was when it came to US foreign policy. One day the US will call you a friend and ally themselves with you. After they got what they wanted, used you up, and turned against you, you would become their enemy. As time went on and I watched the US shift their attention to Iraq and Saddam Hussein, I realized that the US shifted a lot and that they really were hypocrites. They cared nothing about spreading, quote, freedom and democracy. The only thing they cared about was maintaining their dominance throughout the world, politically, economically, militarily, and culturally. Those catchphrases of, quote, freedom and, quote, democracy were only to delude the uneducated American public and make their wars for empire appear, quote, just, quote, laudable. But given any objective reading of history, one would quickly see the hypocrisies of their claims. Sometimes the documentaries I would watch even highlight this in passing. More often than not, though, I wouldn't understand the broader context of their duplicity until I began reading books by Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn. I started to really view US foreign policy differently after I read What Uncle Sam Really Wants and Hegemony or Survival, America's Quest for Global Dominance by Noam Chomsky. I learned a lot of what the US's domestic and foreign policies, also from reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. I mean, these two men were professors at respectable universities in the United States, Spelman College and Boston University in the case of Howard Zinn, and University of Arizona and MIT in the case of Noam Chomsky. Instead of regurgitating the watered down version that they had given us throughout my high school years, they would tell the truth about what was going on around the world. For the first time in my life, I started to enjoy studying history. In fact, around this time, I began studying history intensively. One of the biggest ironies that stood out to me during the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 was their justifications for regime change. They had claimed that Saddam Hussein possessed, quote, weapons of mass destruction. I personally didn't care if he did or not. I knew that the US, Britain, and many other countries possessed weapons of mass destruction too. Who could say which countries could possess them, which ones couldn't? That seemed like a ridiculous argument to make. Nevertheless, I later found out that if Saddam Hussein had any weapons of mass destruction in possession, they had been given to him by the US or their allies. That obviously undermined their whole justification in the first place. Then when I learned that Saddam had used nerve gas and mustard gas during the Iraq-Iran war during the 80s, killing an estimated 7,500 people, both Iranian military and civilians, yet the US still supported him. That even more so undermined their justification for regime change due to him possessing weapons of mass destruction. Then in March 1988, when Saddam used mustard and sarin gas in Halabja, I think that's how you say it, killing 5,000 mostly Iraqi Kurdish women and children, and the US still looked the other way. I realized the US foreign policy wasn't about spreading freedom and democracy whatsoever. It was just about spreading capitalist imperialism, maintaining their empire and dominance over the world. I'm going to pass that to one of y'all.
Okay. Anybody want to say anything about that particular part?
I'm trying to get back into Zoom for some reason. I don't see myself here. Let's see.
Okay. They probably got a picture of one of us because I see you, but I don't see all.
Yeah, I don't see anything, you guys at all.
Okay, you want to touch the screen?
I'm trying to do something here, but.
Okay, swipe it.
Okay. No, there we are. I don't know how this happened. There we are. Okay, I'm back.
Great.
I was just sitting there when it happened to me.
Okay.
Would you like me to read, or do you want to?
If you want to read, or I can read, it's up to you. How do you feel?
I'll go ahead and read for a while. Okay. I began to learn about what imperialism was by studying the US role behind their ongoing wars in the Middle East after 9/11. When they invaded Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and sent special forces into Yemen, none of those wars were about liberating those people. They always left behind mass genocide, misery, more instability in those regions, and even modern day slavery in the case of Barack Obama overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi. In the latter case, Gaddafi had even given up his WMDs voluntarily, but they still found a justification for regime change under the first Black president. I think it was ironic that the modern, hey, I think it was, hi, Veronica. I think it was ironic that the modern day slavery that exists today in Libya came from the first Black president's foreign policy, not a white one. Witnessing international affairs such as that under Barack Obama made me realize that it didn't matter who was in power in the United States. The outcome was never in the interest of the oppressed people in those countries that they were intervening in. This wasn't to say that those regimes that were in power were better off, truly, but only to say that their initial justifications for invading or supporting regime change never amounted to real humanitarian concerns for those people in those countries.
Can you hold on for 1 minute?
Sure.
Sister Veronica, we are on page 117.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and we about to begin reading. They only did what they did. I mean, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's 14 lines down.
Okay, sis, and I'm driving right now, so I won't be able to read, but I'll follow along for sure.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, sister.
No, that's okay.
It's all right.
No, it's good for her to know where we are. They only did what they did to expand and reinforce U.S. imperialist dominance in those regions. If that meant siding even with Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, or even what is it? ISIL. As they, yeah. Maybe that's ISIS, I don't know. As they have done in recent history in Syria, they will do so in order to carry out regime change and maintain hegemony throughout the Middle East and elsewhere. They can always either justify it or completely ignore what they are actually doing to the uneducated American public. It says, see on YouTube, Tulsi Gabbard calls out the US dirty war on Syria that Biden aids admits to. The history of the United States has a long history of overthrowing even democratically elected governments. They had overthrown the democratically elected governments in Iran in 1953, in Guatemala in 1954, in the Congo in 1960, in Brazil in 1964, in Chile in 1973, and many others, just to name a few. They tried to overthrow the democratically elected government of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua throughout the 80s, which led to us learning about the Iran-Contra affair and the CIA's involvement in the drug war during the 80s. Gary Webb wrote a book titled Dark Alliances, detailing this period in US history. While the government was destabilizing regions around the world around this time, they were carrying out a destabilizing war on drugs in the Black and brown communities in particular, which they played both sides on in order to bring about the mass incarceration of many Black and brown people. If I had any respect for the US government, it entirely evaporated when I started to educate myself for the first time about its real history, both here and abroad. That self-education started with me reading many books as I sat on the SHU trying to figure out the direction I wanted to go with my life as I prepared for my upcoming trial. It was an unfortunate predicament I was in, but I look back on those horrific days on the SHU as my rebirth to who I am today. In the US population, if the US population is ever going to join the world human community and right the wrongs that their government has carried out in their name, they will have to be given an honest political education to what has transpired since the founding of this country. Like most countries around the world, most people only know what they tell them in the history books that they write and disseminate in their schools. One of the greatest obstacles for the revolutionary forces across America is that they don't have their own liberation schools. Many revolutionaries even send their kids to their schools to be indoctrinated into a whitewashed version of history and political science. But this capitalist imperialist system will never teach its modern day wage slaves how to be free. It will always seek to blind its population with patriotism and make America great again slogans, which ultimately makes them willing participants in their own enslavement. I'll just read to the end of the paragraph. The only way to counter this is for the people to create their own schools of liberation. Then and only then will they know what they collectively must fight for. Only then will we be able to build a world community that places humanity above individual imperialist powers and bourgeois countries which aspire to become class oppressors themselves.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Any concerns? All right, I'm gonna proceed. During the summer of 2002, my stabbing trial had begun. Months before it commenced, I had been reading Angela Y. Davis' book, If They Come in the Morning. One part really made me consider representing myself during my own trial. I knew Kwame Shakur was Tupac Shakur's mother, but I didn't know that she had represented herself during the Panther II trial. Angela Y. Davis had included a snippet of her trial in her book. I was tremendously inspired and impressed by how she confronted the system and laid out her case. The fact that she was found not guilty and have fully articulated the facts and inconsistencies in her case inspired me to represent myself. Although Kwame was completely innocent while I had actually attacked a correctional officer, the common denominator was that I was also declaring my trial a politically motivated one. I plan on making it political by highlighting how Washbash had covered up Theodore McKenzie murder May 27, 1999, and that we were all vulnerable to the brutality and terror by the hands of the correctional regime at the facility. I didn't feel anyone else could represent my allegations and political motivation besides myself. I have witnessed the brutality and terror from the guards. I knew what it felt like to feel cornered and helpless and at the whim of sadistic guards. I too felt like I would have very well lost my life if I haven't responded as I did when CO Paul Clark had confronted me in a visiting room with his goons standing by. If nobody else was going to shed light on what was going on behind prison walls and locked gates, I knew I could do so boldly and confidently as need be, and I did. Miller. I want to make an oral motion to willing and voluntarily waive effective assistance of counsel right. And I wish to represent my case in my own behalf. And the reason of this is that the dispositions that I have been requesting mine my attorney to observe and to survey to my own understanding of the case so I can assist him, and to proficiently cultivating my case and advocating my cause in a proficient manner. He has failed to do that. I wanted to object to this, but he failed to do that. But not only that, it's like is prejudging me also, because according to my Sixth Amendment right, I have the right to for my attorney to advocate my case, not his cause, my cause, my perception and truth of this case. He owes me, according to Strickland versus Washington, a loyalty to me and also loyalty to my cause. He has failed to do that also. And a recent state is that today I just been presented with documents, my dispositions, just roughly an hour ago, without having any time to truly sit down with my attorney to discuss the matters that I believe need to be targeted in this case, which are a whole bunch of contradictory statements by the state witnesses that I want to attack. He did not believe this to be credible to my cause, nor have my weight of evidence, which I see as contrary. This is a conflict of interest. He told me he believes that I need to take this 8-year plea bargain, to which I told him that I didn't believe I should be found guilty on anything higher than 8 years plea 8 years ago. So I don't believe it was in my best interest to take an 8-year plea bargain. Now my attorney, after speaking with him for a while, began to become mendacious. I just want to be explicit in the reason why, so that if I deny willingly and voluntarily forfeiting my lawyer as my representation, that on appeal or whenever all these facts can be known, my public pretender, Rich Famer's face was red as he sat next to me and heard me call him mendaciously and enumerate all the reason why I wanted to fire him as my counsel and represent myself. I have purposely used words like mendaciously or both intellectually pistol whip my public pretender for trying to play me, while also demonstrating to the courts that they weren't dealing with a dumb ass ninja. I like I say the word. I had learned that an eloquent mind was just as necessary as a mighty sword. That's a great motto. If you was going to fight a system that has been set up to oppress you, you can't just use violence entirely against that system. Sometimes you have to demonstrate intellect and your capability to fight them on many battlefields, not just a physical one. As Mao Tai-tung said, politics is a war without bloodshed, while war is politics with bloodshed. This trial was all political to me. That's why I view my entire trial as a war. I was waging against one of the system's most important institution of repression, prison. While the system had to make prisons out to be institutions of rehabilitation, I needed to show they were really institution of brutality, terror, and completely and antithetical to rehabilitation. But the only battlefield I had at my disposal to demonstrate this was the legal one. And I intended to use this pulpit to shed light on what was really going on inside these prisons. After I made my oral motion to the court, Judge Thomas Johnson called a recess so he could study the Lord upon my request to represent myself. Wow. I thought that was odd because I figured every judge and prosecutor across the United States knew that every citizen has a constitutional right to represent themselves if they wanted to. The fact that he and the prosecutor had to revert back to legal books on this matter showed me that they didn't know a lot of common legal proceedings. They made me even more confidence about challenging them myself as my own attorney. Returning to the bench, the judge explained that he had read up on the law and was going to allow me to represent myself. He went on to outline what that would mean after he reappointed my public pretender as now my standby counsel, Judge Thomas Johnson. Now, Mr. Miller had a chance to research, read the law, this last minute thing that you brought up here, kind of, it's new to the courts. Have you done that week or two ago? Could have answered some more questions that may have come up, but it appears that the question is, as you said earlier, you have the right to waive your counsel to represent yourself. However, there's also question about standby counsel. Judge Johnson, quote, "You understand you have the right to a lawyer in this matter," end of quote. Miller, quote, "Yes, sir," end of quote. Judge Johnson, quote, "You understand that if you can't afford one, the court would appoint one for you and has done so in this case that you asking to represent yourself. Is that right?" End of quote. Miller, "Yes, sir." Judge Johnson, "Okay, you think you need a lawyer to present your side of the case?" Miller, "No, sir." Judge Johnson, quote, "Mr. Bramer gonna be appointed as a standby counsel to represent you." The judge went on to explain what this would entail. He said, he's standby counsel, and you now, if you want him to do something, you ask him to do, and then we'll make a decision on that. In other words, if you want him to help pick the jury, he can do that, end of quote. Because I had elected to represent myself, the judge postponed my trial for a week in order for me to prepare my defense. I think it was 2 or 3 days later that Richard Bramer visited me on the SHU. He came to the prison to inform me about a motion that prosecutor Robert Huntley had filed to limit Richard Bramer's role as my standby counsel. Initially, I didn't care too much about that since I wasn't going to let my standby counsel say anything during my trial anyways. I felt he cared more about trying to get me to sign a plea bargain than to fight my case. Besides, I knew his relationship with the judge and prosecutor was much stronger than his attorney-client relationship with me would ever be. For me, he was simply a constitutional right that was actually an agent for the system that made poor defendant, quote unquote, feel as if they had meaningful legal representation. I knew that most attorneys and public pretenders, though, would sell you out if given a chance. The injustice system was rigged like that against lower class people, especially if you were Black or brown. If I was going to get life in prison, I figure I would feel better if I had at least given it a valiant fight myself instead of letting a public pretender knowingly sell me out. When I left that visit with my standby counsel and got back to my cell to read over what he had given me, I couldn't believe my eyes. The prosecutor was more concerned with preventing Richard Brammer from participating in my trial that he was manipulating case laws to accomplish that end. After I finished reading the case law that the prosecutor was relying on, Gerbil versus State 766 NE 2nd 1 Indiana Court Appeal 2021, I couldn't do anything but smile. He had given me a way to beat my case before my trial has even started. Instead of Gerbil versus State supporting the prosecutor case, this particular case law have found an abuse of discretion from not allowing Gerbil's standby counsel to take over during trial. Like I said, I haven't planned on my standby counsel saying shit at my trial anyways. I didn't trust him, but now I realized that I had a chance to beat my case entirely if I caused a fundamental error by making sure that the court violated my Sixth Amendment right to effective assistance of counsel. All I would need to do to accomplish that end was to object on record and state the reason why I felt the court was violating my Sixth Amendment rights by preventing my standby counsel for participating directly throughout my trial. I couldn't believe how easy they were making this trial for me. Before this had occurred, I was honestly a little worried about getting found guilty for attempted murder. If that happened, I knew I could possibly spend nearly the rest of my life in prison. Just the thought of that give my goosebumps. I mean bumps. Oh my God. Can you just imagine having to have to go on trial and defend yourself before the stresses that's there, where I believe as you trying to defend your child, the judge would do anything to decrease the time or minimize the time, so this way you won't do so much research and you will be so submissive to taking a plea to get a lesser sentence or get out of the situation, but you will be in prison for the rest of your life as a marked person.
Yeah.
It's a shame. It's a shame. It's a shame. But anyway, let me proceed on. Yet now I realized that I was being given the opportunity to beat my case right under their own arrogant supervision. There was no question in my mind that the judge was going to rule in a prosecutor's favor, even if it was against the law. That was the nature of the courtroom normally. Most prosecutors and judges were used to scratching each other back. Many judges had once been prosecutors themselves. I think Robert Huntley thought he stood a better chance defeating me if I was forced to defend myself alone. But he definitely underestimated me and helped me beat that case before my trial even started. I don't know how to pronounce it. Sun Tzu in the Art of War say, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy resistance without fighting. Victorious warriors win first and then go back to war. White defected warrior goes to war first and then seek to win. To know your enemy, you must become your enemy. Anyone like to elaborate on that? What he means to know your enemy, you must become your enemy?
Well,
I see it, you need to know their strategy, familiarize or what they will say to try to defeat you and get one step ahead of the game.
yes.
And it's remarkable, or I say remarkable, that he was able to do that where he was fighting a case within a case within a case. So this way he won't be a victim of the case, you know.
Right.
Well, I'm gonna continue on to the end of the page, and if someone can pick up from that point, I appreciate it. At the start of the trial, the following week, Judge Johnson started off by dismissing my case B felony of being a prisoner in possession of a dangerous device or material. If he haven't done so, that was the first oral motion. I was going to ask for myself. Several months before, I had Richard Brammer to submit a motion to dismiss my attempted murder charge as well as that possession charge. I realized that the prosecutor had failed to include important elements in my initial charging information in order to convict a person of attempted murder in Indiana. The law states that the state of Indiana must explicitly state in the charge information itself that you intentionally took steps to carry out, say, crime of attempted murder. And if they were alleging you was trying to commit that said crime with a deadly weapon, they must also explicitly use that language in the charging information as well. Since they have failed to do that in both my attempted murder charge and prisoner in possession of a dangerous device or material charge, the judge was forced to throw out those charges, and he did months before. However, he gave Robert Huntley a month to refile those charges in order to include the necessary language in both those counts. The prosecutor corrected the charge information in my attempted murder case, but failed to state that I had been in possession of a deadly weapon. Therefore, the judge was forced to throw out that charge, leaving me with the Class A attempted murder and Class C battery charge to fight. I was so relieved because I was the most worried about that possession charge. But when I realized that the prosecutor didn't include deadly weapon language after getting in a chance to correct his mistake, I was finally able to exhale for the first time, I knew the judge will be forced to throw out that charge before my trial even commenced. The charge was no longer even appealable, therefore could never be refiled against me under any circumstance. I wasn't satisfied yet, though. Go ahead, warrior. Go ahead. I raised my fist and went right in by saying, quote, Your Honor, I want to object to the prosecutor recent motion, which precludes my standby counsel from participating in my trial directly. Now, just last week, you stated on record that he could pick my jury if I wanted him to. I never picked a jury before in my life. I have planned on letting Mr. Bramham help me with the part of my trial since I don't have that sort of expertise as him. Like I said, I had no intention of letting Richard Brammer say a word or participate at all during my trial, but they didn't know that. In fact, I wanted the judge to rule against me so I could beat the whole case on appeal. Go ahead, they are. Woo! Okay. Anybody want to pick up on page 122?
Yeah, I'll pick up.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Judge Johnson said, I know what I said last week, but after reading over Mr. Hunley's motion, I'm going to rule in his favor. So Mr. Brammer will not be able to pick your jury for you.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Make an opening statement, cross-examine any witnesses, or make a closing statement. You will be expected to perform those duties throughout your trial. Is that clear?
You know that ain't right.
I want the record to reflect that I object to your ruling. I feel that you're violating the Sixth Amendment right after saying that he could help me pick my jury and perform those same duties if I wanted him to. Your objection is duly noted, Mr. Miller. Now we're going to have to proceed with the voir dire, whatever that is, part of this trial. I object to proceeding with voir dire because even the case that the prosecutor uses says that it's under your discretion to allow my standby counsel to pick my jury for me. Now you're going back on your word to me. I'm unprepared to do this myself. Your objection is duly noted, Mr. Miller, but you're going to have to pick your jury yourself. I've already ruled on this. Neither you can forfeit your right to represent yourself and let Mr. Brammer take back over, or you can represent yourself as you have wished. I went on and objected several more times to emphasize for the record that my Sixth Amendment right was being violated. The judge got so mad at me that he said if I objected one more time, he would rescind my right to represent myself and appoint Mr. Brammer to represent me. I objected one more time in spite of his threat before allowing the proceedings to continue to the next phase of the trial. Despite all my protestations, I was actually smiling on the inside. Most white people underestimate the intelligence of Black people due to the ignorance or arrogance of white supremacy. That's one of the advantages we have over this unscientific ideology. I had never witnessed voir dire being conducted during a trial since I had taken a bench trial for my bank robbery case, but I had an idea of how I was going to pick my jury. I just think this was so smart. This whole way he went about this, because your lawyer never would have done this. When I found out that I could ask the possible jury picks any questions that I wanted and could take as long as I wanted, I wrote down a list of questions that I was going to ask each of them. My strategy was simple. I asked them social and political questions that most lay people could easily answer. However, depending upon their answers, it would inform me to where they fell upon the spectrum of white supremacy and class consciousness. Most white people have been affected by the social conditioning of white supremacy throughout their lives. And because of that, it played a significant role in how they viewed Black people, criminals, what they perceived as true or false. How they viewed Black people as criminals, what they perceived as true or false, and basically their world outlook. This too affects Black people and all demographics of people in the United States. For, quote, liberal white people, though, it isn't something that is readily apparent always to them, yet still is present. It's similar to a man living in a man's world, but can't see that some of his ways are still sexist. If a man never self-evaluates himself in relation to the social world he finds himself in, he may never realize that he may come off to others as being sexist for calling a woman a girl or thinking that a woman's role is domestic, while a man's role is being the breadwinner. For him, it's just a normal way of thinking. He may even view himself as being a liberal or progressive, but doesn't see that he's still a product of patriarchy still. I knew I wasn't going to come across any communist or socialist, but I figured I could eliminate all the overt and covert racists from my jury pool. I stood a better chance of getting the outcome that I wanted if he did that. One of the first questions I asked every potential juror was, who was their favorite president? I personally didn't give two fucks about any of the presidents that they may have named, since they all represent purveyors of imperialism. But I knew most people weren't very class conscious and had come to view certain presidents as stereotypical symbols that said a lot about them. Although I was now conscious of Abraham Lincoln's white supremacy, I ironically viewed any person who mentioned his name as a possible sympathizer of equality, justice, and building a more perfect union. At least that's what he stereotypically symbolized. If someone mentioned Ronald Reagan, I quickly chalked them up as definitely being a racist. Only certain types of people could identify with a person like Ronald Reagan. He symbolized what Donald Trump would come to stand for unmistakably. At this time, I had a stronger working knowledge about many of the well-known presidents and what they symbolized to most people. I used that to determine if the prospective juror would be able to take my defense seriously and hear me out. That's all I was seeking. Some of the other questions I asked the potential jurors were symbolic as well. Around this time, the second Intifada was going on in the Middle East. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had been carrying out state-sanctioned terror attacks against the Palestinian people. He would routinely carry out genocidal policies against them, which many in the international community would condemn. Nonetheless, Zionism and white supremacy had a lot of things in common. Both viewed their most subjugated populations as inferior and less than human. If a potential juror identified more with the Israelis than they did the Palestinians, I figured they would more than likely see Blacks in America in the same way. I also assumed, like the Israelis, they would view correctional officers and the police as being incapable of doing any wrong. To my surprise, most of the prospective jurors didn't have much to say about what was going on in the Middle East, even though it was one of the biggest international stories continually in the news. Those that did, however, helped me to identify where they fell on the spectrum of white supremacy and class consciousness by their answers. One of the trivial questions I asked every potential juror was, what talk show did they watch? One woman said that Jerry Springer was her favorite. Her excited response, along with her answers to my other questions, made me keep her as a juror. Most people who watched Jerry Springer were people who identified more with the lower class and liked to be entertained by them. I figured as long as I presented my defense correctly, she would at least give me the benefit of the doubt. I asked many other questions too, such as, would you stand by a not guilty verdict if you were the only juror who felt I was not guilty of attempted murder, for instance? Or if a correctional officer killed a prisoner, should he or she be held accountable like any other person? Does racism and sexism still exist in America? In what ways have you experienced them in your own life? These and many other questions helped me to select those I kept around as jurors in my case. Since you're only given 3 preemptory challenges where you don't have to give a reason why you struck a potential juror from the jury pool, I used mine very judiciously. I struck one potential juror for being a big Ronald Reagan supporter. The only good thing that Richard Brammer had done for me during my trial was his suggestion that I used another preemptory challenge on the only defense attorney who was a part of my juror pool. This was a guy who routinely represented defendants in that very courtroom. He didn't want to see that attorney influence the jury pool with his legal expertise. What does that say about the justice system when a defense attorney tells you that you better use one of your peremptory challenges against another defense attorney? It tells me that he knows that defense attorneys really play both sides of the fence and really can't be trusted. I'm sure there were many other reasons that he didn't mention to why he was adamant that I get rid of him. The only time I used one, I believe, was on someone who had several close relationships with officers at the prison. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Okay,
I
brother,
can read some.
okay, you want to carry it out because it's just one page. I guess one page. It's not long.
Am I on the right page? I thought we had like 3 pages left, but
After I finished, yeah.
okay. After I finished conducting voir dire, I realized that jury selection is probably the most important part of any trial. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that you can win or lose a case before it even begins if you began with a biased jury pool. That's why I think many white lawyers are incapable of selecting a, quote, fair jury. Most of them don't know what type of questions to ask other white people that will actually uncover their level of racism and class consciousness. Being, quote, objective and hearing the evidence before them is not enough to determine, quote, fairness. A Black person needs to first know if you can truly identify with them as a human being who is worthy of being found not guilty if proven to be so. Otherwise, they'll be found guilty by a courtroom full of, quote, cats. When the judge is a cat, the prosecutor is a cat. The jury are all cats, yet you're the only dog in the courtroom. I began my opening statement admitting that I had, quote, battered Paul Clark, but never with the intent to kill him. There was no way I could deny that anyways. So taking responsibility for my actions from the jump, I figured that the jury would be more likely to take me seriously and hear me out. I needed to paint a picture for them so they could stand in my shoes for a moment, understand why I would take the extreme actions that I did just to plead our case to them. I knew they didn't have the power to end the brutality and terror that surrounded our lives inside prison, but we needed an audience outside of our imprisonment to hear what was really going on inside here. Even though I was on trial, what was that?
Oh, I thought you sneezed. I'm sorry.
Even though I was on trial, you're good. Even though I was on trial, I wanted to use my new platform to put Wabash Valley Correctional Facility on trial too, and for it to be forever documented that I had done so. I was desperate to be heard. If this was the only outlet to be heard with, well, so be it. I had purposely used the word, quote, battered over and over again as I spoke about the incident. I was fine with them convicting me of a Class C felony battery charge, so I gave that to them willingly. My main concern was causing doubt, at least on the Class A felony attempted murder charge. That itself carried a minimum of 20 years in prison. The battery charge only carried a maximum penalty of 8 years. The prosecution's first witness was the prison doctor, who first treated Officer Clark's wound and had him sent to an outside hospital. When he used the terms superficial and non-life-threatening wounds, I repeatedly honed in on those terms and repeated them back to the jury. I feel he turned out to be a better witness for me than the prosecution in the end. I think the second witness the prosecutor called was the correctional officer who was working the floor with Paul Clark. I was able to cause doubt about the head wounds and with his testimony. He admitted that the wound on the back of his head couldn't have come from Clark falling on the weapon. I hadn't expected him to say some of the things he did. Nevertheless, I used every contradiction in his recollection to cause the jury to feel that the prosecutor was reaching by trying to convict me of attempted murder. To this day, I honestly don't remember how Clark had gotten that, quote, stab wound on the back of his head when his testimony opened up the possibility that it came from falling on the ice pick. I jumped on it. In that moment, I realized how cross-examining witnesses was an art as well. Some responses to your questions couldn't have been anticipated. But when a person's testimony offered another explanation for the events, you had to be creative in how you incorporated that into your new narration. To a large extent, a jury trial is a, quote, play that you develop as you go. Whoever directs this play more proficiently than the other, be it the prosecution or the defense, will ultimately prevail. That isn't to say there aren't other variables and factors in play, because this game is a rigged game against the defense from the jump. But if you're able to seat a jury with enough fair-minded people, you can bend, quote, facts in your favor by how well you, quote, perform on the stage. Trials are definitely a mixture between facts and fiction, or should I say a mixture between what happened and what you make the jury believe had transpired. Paul Clark took to the stand next. I spent a while to cross-examine him. It felt really good just to question him and use my limited powers to watch him squirm. When I questioned him about the visiting room incident, he denied any recollection of any altercation between him and I. I knew I wasn't going to accomplish much from his testimony. When the prosecutor called Christopher Moody to the stand, who was one of the responding officers at the scene, I threw a monkey wrench in the game. I started questioning him about his role in the murder of Theodore McKenzie, May 27, 1999, since he had been part of that murder and cover-up. The prosecutor objected, but I was able to convince the judge to allow that line of questioning into the trial, since I told him this was my whole intent for doing what I did that day. That changed the whole course of the trial and helped me to transition to my defense when I started calling my own witnesses to the stand. Since I had been charged with attempted murder, my specific intent, which in the law they refer to as one's, quote, mens rea, was very important. You cannot, according to the law, convict someone of attempted murder if they didn't specifically intend to kill that person. My case pivoted on that very point. That's why I continually brought up my intent during the trial. My argument was that I had only done what I had done to shed light on what Wabash was covering up and getting away with. And for me to kill Paul Clark would make me no better than them. What had occurred that day was simply a political statement to give me this particular platform to speak to them and get it and record it for history. If I had killed Clark that day, that would have negated my own argument, I argued. My first witness, Robert Keeby, was instrumental in calculating this part of my argument into the jury. Mr. Keeby was an older black brother who I think had been in prison around the same time for over 20 years. He had a salt and pepper afro that gave him a Frederick Douglass type fearlessness. When they brought me to the segregation, DSEG unit after the stabbing, they put me in the cell next to Mr. Keeby. The short time I was in that unit with him, I had grown to like and trust him. I told him I would be calling him when I went to trial for that case. The only way I was able to make that possible was to claim that I had told Robert Keeby about what I had done and why I had done it when I was placed in that cell next to him. I had told him some things, but not entirely what I had alleged. There were ways to bend legal rules, and I was adept at doing so in order to paint a picture that I wanted for the jury. Like I said, I was placing Wabash Valley Correctional Facility on trial while they appeared to be placing me on trial. Mr. Keeby's attorney or Mr. Keeby's testimony helped me to introduce a necessary euphemism into the trial. From that point on, we started to refer to the ice pick as a quote frog sticker.
I love that.
It took the deadlines out of the weapon. The deadline, I think that
Deadliness, I think it should be.
deadliness out of the weapon, the more we refer to that weapon as such. I used that as an opportunity to explain to the jury what if I had really intended to kill Paul Clark, I wouldn't have procured a frog sticker to do. I would have gotten a real deadly weapon. I'm forever thankful to Robert Keeby for coming to testify for me. I learned years later that he had died while still serving his time. Rest in power, comrade. The next person I called to the stand was Thomas Wagner, aka Kitty. Since he had been on DSEG when Theodore McKenzie had been murdered, I knew his testimony would be a powerful recollection of what had occurred that day. Kitty gave a very detailed account of what had occurred. I think what made his testimony even more powerful is when I had submitted the internal affairs report on him and how they had given him a year on the SHU for refusing to recant his statement. This was a white guy who had been given a year on the SHU for refusing to lie for the prison regime. I think when the jury heard that, shifted the focus from me stabbing Paul Clark to them murdering Theodore McKenzie. I think my argument that I had done what I did in order to shed light on what was going on inside the Wabash gained credibility in the jury's eyes. I will forever be indebted to Kitty for his testimony. He didn't know I was calling him to testify for me until he walked into the courtroom that day, but he didn't hesitate to put forth the actual facts behind McKenzie's murder and cover up. My last powerful witness was Shane Hatter. He walked into the courtroom with bruises on his body and blood in his eyes. I knew what happened to him the night before and used that to put a cherry on top of my argument. The guards on the SHU had run into Shane's cell and beat the shit out of him. What made his beating seem trial related was the fact that he had come from another prison to testify at my trial. The guards beat him up in less than 24 hours of arriving at the SHU. I used that altercation to highlight the brutality of the guards at Wabash. If they could beat up a white guy in less than 24 hours of arriving at that prison to testify at a trial, what would they do to a black mentally ill prisoner there? I was able to get the judge to agree to allow Shane to take off his shirt to show all the bruises and boot marks on his body. He had blood in his eyes from the broken blood vessels in it. His body was the evidence that I used to prove my argument and place Wabash Valley Correctional Facility on trial. I watched the jury's facial expressions when he took off his shirt. I knew I had proved my case, so I rested. The jury then retried to deliberate. When they finally came back with their verdict, I was nervous to say the least. I was fine with whatever they said because I had been heard and had gotten all of this on record. Besides, I felt relieved to have done so by representing myself rather than allowing a public pretender to undermine my case. Nevertheless, I didn't feel my heart beating again until I heard the judge announce there was a hung jury on my attempted murder charge. I was found guilty for the battery charge. All I could do was smile. I had another chance of getting out of prison one day. The following month, I was given an additional 8 years in prison. On appeal, however, The Indiana Court of Appeals had reversed my case due to the judge violating my Sixth Amendment right. The prosecutor decided to refile charges against me either.
Wow.
Wow,
That
lots
was
of
amazing.
skill, but lots of
The
luck too.
emphasis was really guiding our brother Dayon. And this reflect on exactly the 10-point programs that was written by Brother Honorary Seal, Dr. Newton, and Hillier, where it addressed point 5, where we want education for our people that espouses the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. Because they further stated that we believe in an education system that will give our people a knowledge of self. And if a man does not have knowledge of himself and his position in society in the world, then he has little chance to relate to anything else. And this is a prime example where, you know, like I mentioned with Brother Dayon, he had to fight a case within a case. He had to really advocate himself because he had all types of forces against him, where his pretender or defender wasn't really defending him. So he had to prove to the state that he's not going to allow just a plea for a case to just be heard and finished with, and that was sentence him forever in prison, where he'll rot in prison. But he knew he had no other chances but to advocate himself. And if you don't advocate yourself, you have nothing to advocate, because there isn't going to be anyone out there to advocate you for anything in the world. Then to bring on of the 10-point program, point number 9, where we want freedom for all Black and poor oppressed people now held in U.S. federal, state, county, city, and military prisons and jails. We want trials by a jury of peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country, where they further explain that we believe that many Black and poor oppressed people now held in U.S. prisons and jails have not received fair and impartial trials under a racist and fascist traditional system, and should be free from incarceration, in which Brother Dayon was able to turn his whole case for the state to hear what he has to say and to concentrate on other cases that will help him to win and lessen his sentence in prison. And they further stated under point number 9, we believe in the ultimate elimination of all ratchet, inhumane, penal institution, because the masses of men and women imprisoned inside the United States or by the U.S. military are victims of oppressive condition, which is the real cause of that imprisonment. We believe that when persons are brought to trial, that they must be guaranteed by the United States juries of their peers, attorneys of their choice, and freedom from imprisonment while awaiting trial. And he pretty much addressed all of that, in which he was a repeated victim, even when he had to present his case for it to be appealed and turned over in his favor. Is there anything anybody would like to conclude, add, or speak about in regarding to this chapter, which he touched so many subjects?
Yeah,
so many.
Yeah, that's the thing, Sister Anna, that there was so much covered in here, but I found this one of the best chapters. Just it was so compelling. and like I said in the, before we started, that the good guy wins, right? Like
Yes, it does.
Perry Mason, but the good guy wins. And I actually had an experience, not like exactly like that, but I beat a case against me when I was a young woman. I got arrested for shoplifting and I managed to beat it, but I wasn't defending myself, but I was also like bending the ear of my public defender, pretender, so
Right.
that we were able to. And I did some smart ass things, I guess, to start with. I was stealing shoes and I got them all dirty. I got them all dirty on the bottom, so that my attorney was able to throw them in front of the jury and go, "I'll let the shoes speak for themselves."
Oh my goodness, like the glove fit your hand. Oh my goodness.
But the experience I've, know by growing up and seeing a lot of cases and having been in courtrooms for other people, very rare for you to win. I mean, he won by a lot of skill in this case and some luck that fell his way. Because I'll tell you what, I've been in court. Well, I just know so many people been railroaded. When we had this demonstration outside the jail, Sister Anna was there. I don't know if you were there, Nick. I think you were. Yeah. Didn't you come to the Chicago for that? No, maybe not.
I was planning on coming and
Yeah.
organized the trip and then got sick.
Oh, well, probably better you didn't come then. But anyways, you remember that the case of Tyrone Clay, his mother and his aunt were there, and sister had come to our demonstration because right next door, right across the street, their son and, nephew and brother was locked up for a crime he did not commit. And this is typical. Now, from what you were saying, Sister Ann, is really true. A very uneducated young man and not being given the opportunity anymore. Kwame will tell you things have changed, even in prison. You can't, you don't have the access that you once did to the books and the study. A lot of men used to train themselves. The prison lawyer, right? He would train himself to do this. But they're starting now. I think he was saying in the last one where, books are banned and things are prohibited from you getting. So anyway, Tyrone Clay, he represents millions of other guys, and here are thousands in Chicago locked up for just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cops come through, they want a body to take with them, throw them in the back of the car, right? So another one case I was in West Virginia, Joe West. This was a white guy. He was like one of these street preachers, right? And he got with us communists, right? So he started talking about shit that they didn't want to hear, about the government, stuff like Kwame's talking about in the beginning of this chapter, where he's exposing the role of our government. And so they railroaded Joe West into court on some bogus charges. And he had a case. I mean, they had no case against him. And here's what they did. Every time the lawyer went to present the truth, the judge would say, "I want the jury dismissed from the room," and they get rid of the jury. And then he would tell the defense, "You will not bring that subject up. You will not bring that up. I want the record to strike all of this." Jury would come back, "I want you to forget what you have heard." He was not allowed to present his case. I mean, wow. I couldn't believe it. But look, going on in history, Reverend Pinckney, railroaded, just totally railroaded, because he had thousands of people in what's his town, Benton Harbor, Michigan, who know him. He's a pastor. They support him. He's a righteous man. They railroaded him, bogus frame up charges, and actually threw the book at him, put him in. You can't believe, talk about a jury, white supremacist jury. it was just horrible, the stories that came back from that trial. So I know that the courtroom now, that whatever you might have won at one point through skill and, a lot knowledge like that Kwame had acquired for himself, is becoming even more difficult. They're slamming the door to any kind of justice for us. And we used to have a tiny bit, of like rights, right? Like he's talking about his Sixth Amendment right. But they find ways to deny you your rights, even under the Constitution. So I didn't want to be just, yeah, that was all I wanted. That's what struck me, is that there was, although it was a lovely, exciting story and rewarding to read, that it's the exception now, not the rule.
Right. And I agree what you're saying. And it just comes down to the question of self-determination. And it seems like it draws a lot of questions about the educational system, where you don't need a degree in order to be successful in an area in which you will learn and will practice and will study that can help you in the long run or the short, and in the case of Brother Kwame, he had to fight for his life. And of course, he don't have a degree in law, but he was able to not only articulate the language that surprised many people, including the judge, but he was able to do a lot of deep researches where they probably restrict that now for those detainees and incarcerated individuals.
Right.
So this way, they will have less time to spend on a case. They will have less thinking of what they need to prove in order to show some validity in winning a case. So this way, they can promote more free slavery, modern slavery, which, the 13, 14, 15 amendments needs to be revised, because we still living in slavery, have a slavery system. So it also reflect on the latest news in which a number of, I would say, people receive nursing certificates. I don't know if they were registered or just certified nurses, where you really don't even need to go to school, where it will indebt you. But only thing you have to do is research and study on your own. Although you got the institutions like the nursing field, they want to maintain the principle where you can also learn that without going to school, and you can prepare yourself to pass the board of nursing to become a nurse. And now they're saying that you're not technically a nurse because you don't have the academic credentials. And I'm saying, well, it's like self-teaching yourself. And believe you me, in the field of nursing, whether you are, a CNA or PA or NCP or RN or so forth, you got to go through some steps, some procedure. You got to memorize every step. If a word, and if you compound word is out of this place, they will fail you. If you miss a step, you're out. You got to show a written portion or self-return demonstration of it, and you are timed. So I question you about, okay, I'm going to school, paying all this money to get my academic credentials so I could be sponsored to become certified, registered with the state. But then again, you have someone in a case dealing with the judicial system where they know they have to fight for their life and they can represent themselves, and they don't need a pretender or attorney who's going to just do nothing but cause them to be incarcerated for the rest of their life. And they spoke eloquently well, like how you had to present yourself, Comrade Elder, as well as our brother Dayon. So make us look at the education system itself in light of what had been presented and what we read today. Do you agree, Brother Nico, or is there anything you want to add or include?
Yeah, I've got a bunch to add, but Veronica has a hand, so I want to give hers.
Oh, thank you, brother, because I'm not seeing nothing but a complete face. So thank you.
Oh, I see
Please.
her hand in the corner there.
I don't see nothing. So thank you. Interject. Go ahead, Sister Veronica.
No problem. Thank you, comrades. I appreciate everything that everyone is bringing to the table. I just wanted to interject a little bit more on the issue of self-determination. And I was thinking about Brother Malcolm X, and there was a time where he was speaking at a militant labor forum back in 1965. And he had said these words, "I'm the man you think you are. And if it doesn't take legislation to make you a man and get your rights recognized, don't even talk that legislative talk to me. No, if we're both human beings, we'll do the same thing. And if you want to know what I'll do, figure out what you'll do. I'll do the same thing, only more of it." You know, and when I'm hearing, you know, you guys reading the chapter, it brings these words to my mind, because, you know, when we talk about self-determination, it's exactly that. We're not waiting for somebody to come around and do for us what we can do for ourselves. And not only will we do it for ourselves, you know, in some meaningless way or some half-assed way, like the public pretenders do in the so-called justice system, but we're literally fighting for our lives. Nobody's going to fight for us the way we're going to fight for ourselves and for our children and our people. We have to do that for ourselves. And that's what self-determination is about. It's about knowing who you are and fighting for what's rightfully yours. You know, so this chapter, to me, if I would, you know, had the opportunity to entitle it something, it would have been on the issue of self-determination, because, you know, our brother Kwame was not, he wasn't going to just sit back and just lay the shit play out the way that it was going to play out.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, again, you know, I always like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all of our political prisoners and prisoners of war and all the colonial subjects behind the wall, who are trying to transform their colonized mindset to that revolutionary mindset. And, you know, this chapter here was just, it was very, very inspiring, just to remind us. And as both of you sisters have mentioned, the circumstances, even though we can still relate them, you know, they've only sharpened their strategy. And so when we talk about warfare, we have to recognize that we're even at war.
Yeah.
If you don't recognize that you're at war, then you're not fighting. You just sit there, you know, you get a ticket in the mail, you know, something as simple as you didn't completely stop or whatever, and we just don't even fight it. And, you know, we do hear those stories even in those kind of situations where, you know, they go and they, you know, take care of it. But in issues like this, where we're talking about 25 years to life, I mean, 25 years is a life sentence, you know? And so it just perpetuates that further genocide of our people. And so when we talk about self-determination, you know, whatever it is that is plaguing us, whether it be in the justice system, whether it be at school, wherever it is, we have to stand up for ourselves, because nobody's going to fight for us like we fight for ourselves.
Yeah,
absolutely. And to add on to that, it just brings me to another book that I'm reading concerning the blueprint of the Black Panther and all the intercommunion programs, which serve as a blueprint for us to continue on as current revolutionary in the struggle and what we are faced with. And I just want to quote on, which really pretty much sum exactly what's going on, because the case that was presented in this chapter, of course, was against Brother Dayon, where he had to fight as if he was, you know, his own attorney, as well as a person being tried. So he was being tried all over the place. But this comes from Dr. Kanye West, as we know, who is a professor from Princeton University, where he said, and it is some harsh words now, the founding of the precious experiment a democracy in the United States was based in large part on the niggerizations of African people. This century-long process of niggerization was not simply the enslavement and exploitation of Black people. It also aimed to keep Black people, and when I speak of Black people, I also include oppressed people that's scared, intimidated, disrespectful, and distrustful of each other, and doomed to helplessness and hopelessness, where the basis goals of niggerization were to promote white greed and hatred. Its primary strategies to secure these goals were racist ideology that degrade and devalue Black people, and racist violence that terrorizes Black people and oppressed people. And it is pretty much, some of exactly that, you know what I'm saying? Of, what Dayon, which is Brother Kwame, who have to face. And he just wanted, I just want to add, what Dr. West said, that the Black Panther Party, for example, was the greatest threat with this intercommunion programs of self-determination, fighting for what's right, where American apartheid, because it was indigenous in composition, interracial in strategy, and tactic, and international in vision and analysis. And it's unfortunate where we have all these programs that's supposed to help us, but it seems like it's just masking a situation where it's not helping the people, where we have to really depend on these intercommunion programs to help ourselves, because we're always going to be a victim to the system. Education, prison, even when it comes to social programs, depending on a public assistant where there's no assistant, this health care, Obamacare, is a two-way sword where you're going to cut you at the end. You're going to pay for it because there's nothing free in this world unless it's welfare. And if it's welfare, it's showing that you will be dependent on the government, and the government going to attack your wages, So I was really honored to read this chapter concerning 9/11 that, bring up a whole lot about 9/11 itself and our view of America. And one thing that I said that opened my eyes as a revolutionary is a book called The Bay of Pigs. If you haven't read it, it's only $4.99. The book. I had to read that book, honestly, 3 times because I could not believe it. And it was telling you how they was doing everything to overthrow Fidel Castro, and really showing America ass for what it is, basically. And I was like, dog, I thought we was the land of the free and all of this. No, the crookedness that went on, was amazing. And a fun fact about Osama bin Laden, and I'm gonna see if y'all can guess this. Well, believe it or whatever. There was one celebrity in which bin Laden had fell in love with, where he was about to give all his, not all, but half of his dowry to marry this particular person. I was about to say it. Can you guess who it was?
Oh my God.
Try to. Just try to.
Was it Beyonce?
Yeah. No, but close. But no.
You're gonna have to give us a clue, sis.
Yeah,
I
I have
give
no
you-
idea.
If I give you a clue, I'm gonna give you.
You'll
an
give it
answer.
away.
I'm gonna give it away. Are you ready?
Okay, give it away.
But I will always love you. Are
Uh,
you
Whitney
serious?
Houston? Whitney
was-
Houston? Whitney Houston?
yeah, Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Veronica, I repeated what Veronica guessed. It's
Yeah,
been
and
a while.
And what was so crazy, people couldn't understand why
Unbelievable.
when the day of her funeral, why the flag was laid half staff. And
Yeah.
it's because the United States, when they found out, the feds found out, they wanted Whitney Houston to really go forward and have a relationship with him.
Oh my God. Can you
They need to stop.
imagine?
Yes. And she was married to Bobby,
Yeah.
so she didn't only say no, but she said hell no.
Bobby,
there was a lot-
Bobby wasn't
there
going
was a
for it
lot-
either.
You know, they wanted, Whitney Houston to do it, and I found that out. Bin Laden was seriously so in love with this woman.
Oh
wanted
my
to give
God.
His donkeys, his cows, his goats, everything as a dowry to get her hand in marriage to be his wife.
Oh, they-
All right, so that's a fun fact. Now, how long? Okay, let's see.
Now Nick has his hand up.
Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
okay, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going back quite a ways in the conversation, but it relates to everything we're saying is we keep using the word education, and I think in our society we get that convoluted with schooling.
Yeah.
Education and schooling are different things. Schooling's an intentional project. It's a nation building project. It's an indoctrination project where education is all the things we learn, how to exist in society, and obviously, the whole book is really about Kwame's education and the failings. I don't even know if I want to say the failings of school, but because the schooling is doing what it's intended to do. And part of that is like the prison to school, or the school to prison pipeline, right? And I think actually earlier today I read an interesting article, Understanding Power and the Role of the State in Rally Comrades. It's from 2012, and really talks about the role of the state being to protect the ruling class interests, not just here in this country, but historically. That's why the state exists, right? So the project of schooling in this country has been to unify the people around certain ideas that give legitimacy to the state, right? At one point, we didn't have a national education schooling system. And as that arose, that gave further unification of our country to identify with people, identify with the flag, identify with the Constitution and the founding fathers, and helped further get our mindset thinking we're all one people, right? We have this imagined community of everyone in the United States because we have this similar education system or similar schooling system. But as the book highlights, and we all know from our life experiences, that all of that's biased, right? It's all to it gets us to accept the imperial nature of the United States, and indoctrinate us into the thinking of U.S. exceptionalism and buy into the American dream and all of that. But further past K through 12 education, we have universities, right? Which as someone was saying that made me think of this earlier, how universities are a filter, right? You have to pass all these tests to get to a point, to
And
even
pay big bucks.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yes, and keep you in debt.
Exactly. I'm $70,000 in debt for my undergrad, right? That's the only way I could have gone to school. But and it was also to it gets a lot of people who are passionate about changing the world into a career path where they think that they can change the world through a career, which isn't a thing. It's just not a thing at all. And so I just think that a big part of education is learning from other people's experiences and elders, learning how the system contradicts itself, where there's supposed to be these checks and balances and balance of power between executive, legislative, and judicial branches, but they're all part of playing the same role of protecting the ruling class. And these courts are not legitimate. They shouldn't be legitimate. No. We, as people in general, maybe not us in this room, but as a country, we give legitimacy, we hand over the legitimacy to these courts. Kwame's experience written in this chapter and the whole book is an example. But some of the founders and longtime leaders of the Poor People's Army, Sherry Honkla and Galen Tyler, were charged July 4th, 2004, charged with 22 years of assault on a police officer. Had they been convicted, they would still be in prison today. And they had a pretty good lawyer that was helping them and had helped them with lots of different cases. And Sherry's been arrested over 200 times, so she's always in court. And this they had filmed the incident when they supposedly assaulted police officers. And once the film came into the courtroom, it just wiped away all the testimonies of the cops saying they saw them assault police officers. And as they ended up settling out of court. And just 1 month before, or less than a month before Christmas, they settled for, each got $1,000 for each year they would have done in prison. So they each got $22,000. As poor people, just before Christmas, that's a big win, right? Well, that same lawyer had a similar case in the city of Philadelphia, of like wrongful arrests, accusations, or whatever. So that same lawyer, a month after this case, settled for someone else out of court for $1 million, right? So that lawyer made an agreement with the city, hey, settle low for these people who are organizers and revolutionaries who want to challenge the system. Settle low for them and you'll get your big paycheck for the other guy who's not going to put that money towards building a movement to change things, right? That was the last time they used that lawyer, but it goes to show that lawyers in general are agents of the state. They're not there to help people. There may be a good lawyer here and there, but they're always indoctrinated into the system, and they are what gives further legitimacy to the courts in the first place. And I don't know, just another example of how we as revolutionaries need to be doing education ourselves and studying together in deep ways, not just reading these autobiographies of other people, but really analyzing what are the forces we're up against, what are our goals, what is the political motion that is happening out there, what of that political motion is revolutionary, what of that political motion is counter-revolutionary, because I see the majority of the political motion that's happening in this country as not just not revolutionary, but counter-revolutionary. I think, in the Poor People's Army, we always say, we're not the left, we're not the right, we're the bottom coming for the top. Because, leftists have left behind poor people a long time ago, and feed into this political motion that's counterproductive. We talked about last Sunday how, the ruling class and the state wants us to have reactionary protests to every issue that's happening. And protests are supposed to be to demonstrate power, right? And most of them, one, don't demonstrate power, and two, there's all of these leftist groups who are, something happens, they have a reactionary protest to say, hey, look, we're trying to do something here about this issue, and then go on to plan the next protest and the next protest and the next protest. And it's just creating political motion that's really a hamster wheel, and not getting us further to our goals, which to me can't just be this abstract revolution, right? Because like revolution is a goal, I guess, but what is revolution? The way I look at it is there's a revolution happening to us, and it's an economic revolution as a result of, new tools, new productive tools introduced to our society, that's creating this new class of permanently unemployed, underemployed people. And I just think we have to really look at that and look at, what's our role? What motion are we creating? And what goals do we have? What are the strategies and tactics that are needed to ever meet those goals? And what are the strategies and tactics of the ruling class to put us on a hamster wheel of just studying, or just being a voice, just being an intellectual, or just doing charity work and calling it mutual aid and just passing out food? And what are the ways we can bring all these things together, with, the fight for prison abolition and police abolition and the abolition of hunger and homelessness and poverty, and bring one massive movement together, that's not just trying to solve each one of the different issues that are in the way of us gaining power, self-determination, and ultimately liberation. But yeah,
Okay.
I think that's
Okay.
super important. And
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Thank you. Sister Elder, you
Yeah.
raised your hand.
Oh, well, I know we're coming to the end and I really want to hear your word game. But
Oh, okay.
the only thing I promised my husband I'd make this announcement. There's a woman, her name is Dr. Betty Curse, and she wrote this book called The Other Madisons. And it's a book about, like, President James Madison. There's a whole slave side of his family. These are the other Madisons. She's a member of that side of the family. She's going to have a TED Talk, and he's been corresponding with her. It's a real good book. And it's going to be Thursday at 7:30. That's this Thursday at 7:30. I'll put it in Signal too. I think it would be good if we supported her, because she's really documented, this whole story of, who President James Madison really was, raping his slaves, having children by them, then selling them in slavery, things like that. But anyway, on the question of education, just briefly, that we're doing this. This is what's happening. I'm really proud of the Second Rainbow Coalition. Every group is having educationals. They're going on every night of the week, I think. These books that are being read, and Brown Berets, Rafa holds really meaningful educationals. And I think the Poor People's Army has one coming up. So this is what we need: more discussion, more polemic, get it all out. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
So
Right.
we can get smart.
Right. And I agree with what you're saying, sister. I just want to add to that. That's the reason why when people say, let's talk more work, no, that's harsh mess. And I'll call it plainly out shit. You need to start a dialogue. You need to talk about things that matter, okay? And one form of political education is to question things that concern you on a local level, on a state level, and on a federal level. Else, what are you fighting for? You cannot work for something that you don't know, or either share the information that can expand your research and what you need to do. When I have used schools, it just comes down to, you have a government that want to use a program as a means in order for you to become successful in the level, of a field that you want to get into. You have to pay the price of that. And now we got to question, is there going to be physical school? Because now we're going to go back to schools being not, I wouldn't say a choice, but it's going to be a matter where you won't have a choice. Yeah, you won't have a choice, because it's going to go back to the elite, where you're going to be selected. You got to compete in order to go to school. And then again, you got to look at the fact that now more students are going virtual. So they see these grants and these monies that's going to school is not needed there. So they taking millions of dollars away, which they are taking presently, where why not teach, what our students need to know at home, and limit it to us, because you go to these classes and they teaching you exactly what you're reading from the textbook, with little information that will help you as a side note or more informative way on how you can comprehend, understand, or what you are reading in order to be successful, graduate, be less in debt. But they're gonna always forever keep you in debt. And
Yeah.
there are people like you, brother Nico, that sent thousands of dollars, and with the interest, you can't defer it, you can't do nothing, because that's going to put you further in debt. And I'm gonna tell you, with the generation after baby boomer, people, oh my goodness, the financial mess that everybody's in, they're not gonna ever get themselves out of a hole. It's always
That's
gonna
right.
be a ruckus on that. So I'm gonna close that conversation because we are past the time. It's like a 4:10. Sister, I know you are in commute, but is there anything you would like to add before we go to this game segment and close out for today? Sister Veronica? Okay, I think she's being distracted and it's important for her to drive. So I was gonna do this pyramid type of giving you a list of words that you have to guess, and you have like a certain amount of minutes to guess it, and a person that gets most of the words will win. But we don't have time for that, so I'm just gonna narrow it down to one word of guess this word. It's 11 letters, and it deals with Brother Dayon in this chapter, in which the word was mentioned more than several times. And I would say, as far as the hint of concern, is to hold, I would say hold you down. Hold you down.
Oh,
So you want to guess? what
I'm
the
gonna
word
try. 11 letters.
11
Oh my
letters.
God.
is? It's 11 letters,
Oh, and it's a,
and it deals with what
how
he has
about
to do.
oppression?
No.
Oppression? No?
But you can call out a letter.
Okay,
That's what I thought it was. That's 10 letters.
is
Yeah.
it, oh, that's
No.
10. Well, okay, use the word, pick the letter E.
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 Okay. Wait a minute, I gotta count it. Okay. Let me count it. 1. Okay. Okay, you can write it. It's 11 words. It's the 7th letter. It's 10th letter.
And the last, oh, it's 10?
No, you got 2 E's.
Okay,
And it's
one at
the
the end.
7th letter and the 10th letter.
Oh, the 10th, okay.
Okay.
Ooh,
Can you guess?
oh my God. It's not stereo. No.
No. Okay.
Let's see.
Okay.
What was that other word in here? I'm looking.
Anybody can jump in now.
It's not no, it's not mendacious. Let's
No.
see. Let's see.
It's a word where the hint is, it will hold you down. Let's see, without giving away. It will hold you down. It was suppressed. It deals with suppression.
Well, it's not oppression, repression. No,
No. Brother Nico, I mean,
I'm trying to think here. Is
Ah,
there an
you can
R?
call out a letter.
Is there an
Call
R?
out.
You don't have to guess it. You could call out a letter.
Is there an R?
Yep. I got to count it.
Is that the last letter? Is that an R? If it's not, it's a D.
No, it's not the last letter.
Is the last letter a D?
It's the 5th letter.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, R.
And wait, 5, 6, and the 9th letter.
Is the last letter a D?
Yep.
Okay. Any other D's in there?
Nope.
Okay. So red is the last, something red. Or something, or
Is
ooh.
that your hands up, sister, elder? That's your hand? I can't see it. I think it's your
No,
hand.
no, I didn't put it up. I'm
Whose
thinking.
hand is that?
I
Nobody
don't
has-
think,
Nobody has a hand up.
Okay.
It's probably your own hand, sister. I did that once. I thought somebody was holding their hand up. It was my cursor.
Anybody want to guess the letter or vowel?
oh, how about P?
Nope.
How about O?
Nope.
I?
How about an S?
Yes.
Did you guess S, Veronica?
Yeah, I was asking for an S.
No. Come
No.
on, brother Nico.
Now, where's that I? I don't see it. Where's the I?
The I is the first letter.
Oh my God, really?
Institutionalized?
Oh, institution?
You can still call out letters.
N, the letter N. N.
No.
M.
Wait a minute. Let me take that back. Yes. N is correct. It's
Is
the
it-
second letter.
I-N. Incarcerated.